Hi, my name is Carla Wilshire and I'm the CEO of the Migration Council Australia. We're extremely proud to auspice the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership. And we're here today for the online launch of an online course, so very appropriate all round, an online course on culturally responsive practice for older people in health and aged care. It's a course that the team have worked with both clinical expertise and community expertise to create, and we're enormously proud of it. Before we start, I really wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that each of us are meeting on and ask if everyone could just take a moment to reflect on the land that they are meeting on today and to pay our respects to elders past and present and of course emerging. I have the opportunity and the very first opportunity to introduce our incoming chair of the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership, Vijay Roach. I've known Vijay for quite a few years and I'll first talk about his formal titles. He's currently the president of the College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And he is the president-elect, or chair-elect, I should say, of the Council of the Presidents of Medical Colleges. Holds really important positions within the broader medical community. But what I wanted to talk about is, in the time that I've known Vijay, the wealth of warmth and empathy and compassion that he brings to the partnership, which I think, will really set us in a good position over the next few years. And the strategic mind that he will bring to the partnership, I think, is so valuable. When you hear Vijay talk about how we move medicine from being transactional to relational, you really get this sense of where the potential is within our society to bring together the community and the medical world for great advancement and what they could do in terms of our future society and what the vision could look like. So Vijay, thank you so much for joining the partnership, and I'm really looking forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you. That's a very kind introduction. And yes, I am very newly minted. I've only just arrived, and this is the first time that they've allowed me out in public. I'm very honoured to be given the position of chair of the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership. And I was reflecting on my own upbringing, born and brought up in Australia, and really being very much part of the dominant culture. I think that I haven't engaged as much as I might have with the migrant and refugee community, with multicultural Australia. And so I see this position as a great opportunity for me for personal growth and development. And I'm very honoured to be working with Carla and Gulnara and Devlina and Veronica and Cara and others in the team who are true leaders, that their commitment, their passion, their desire to improve an understanding of multicultural Australia is truly inspirational. And I know that there is so much that I will learn from them. So today we are delighted. How exciting to be launching the online course on culturally responsive practice with older people in health and aged care. You can see that I'm reading it. It's amazing how these things always need to seem to have such a long title. But basically, it's can we look after people as they get older in a culturally responsive way? And this is a way in which we could learn. And the person who has been behind all of the development, the person who really understands this project, and for whom it's been her heart and soul, is Gulnara Abasova, who's the Executive Officer of the partnership. And I'd like to ask her to give us a background to this project.
Well, thanks very much, Vijay, and thanks to everyone who's joining this exciting event online. There are many more people who've been involved in this course, and that's probably the best part about this course, the collaborative approach that the partnership took to developing the course. And I would really like to thank both the members of the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership over the last couple of years, as well as the many community representatives, the stakeholders who were consulted on the content, the stakeholders who contributed with the scenarios and case studies and the ideas and what should really go into this course. So it's certainly not just me. And I really just want to make it very clear. It was a very collaborative project. There are a couple of things that are important about this course that I would really like to share with all of you. Well, first, that it targets a broad range of health practitioners. It targets medical practitioners, it targets nurses, it targets allied health practitioners, basically everyone who is involved at any point in time in the care for older people from migrant and refugee backgrounds. Another important point about the course is that it targets different settings. We're looking at the primary care settings, we're looking at residential aged care settings, we're looking at end-of-life settings, which are really important as well. And that's that sort of holistic approach that we're taking to the course, that the care occurs at different points in time with engagement of different practitioners, and how do we support outcomes, better experiences for people at the center, regardless of the complexity of the system. The course importantly draws on the established standards, education guidelines and practice standards for health practitioners. It's very much linked into the core of the of health practice, accepted best practice in Australia. It is also very much linked to the competency standards framework on caring for migrant and refugee patients that the Health Partnership developed a few years ago. The framework that was endorsed by a whole range of health big bodies, as well as community sector bodies. Not just Australia's first, but also globally first competency standards framework that's really providing a foundation for what good practice looks like. And that's what the course builds on. It really looks at supporting the practitioners to understand how to engage with individuals, both from a person-centered perspective, but also within their cultural framework. What is the best practice for caring for all the people from migrant and refugee backgrounds? What are the safety and quality considerations that should be going into the care? What are the communication needs and the complexities? And in fact, the course looks quite a lot at the issue of language and culture, and how to engage beyond those complexities. Perhaps another important point, which is a bit of a carrot, it's actually accredited with a whole range of bodies, with the College of General Practitioners, with the College of Rural and Remote Medicine, College of Gynecology and Obstetrics, College of Nursing, and we're adding to the list. So we're really trying to support health practitioners, not just with knowledge and new skills and new ideas, but also how making it very clear how it can link into their practice and how it relates to their day-to-day work as health practitioners. So we're incredibly excited to be launching this work, and as I said, it's the work of many people, and including those of our audience on this call today. And I would really like to thank everyone for this opportunity to contribute to better health outcomes for migrants and refugees in Australia. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gulnara. Thank you for giving us that outline and that understanding. We're going to hear today from a whole series of experts and people who have dedicated their whole lives to equitable healthcare for patients from migrant and refugee backgrounds and others. And my introduction of them will be very brief. Dr. Jamal Rifi, I mean, you only need to watch the television and he pops up everywhere. So it doesn't matter, every evening when I turn it on, there's a story about Jamal or his house or his front garden. And I feel as though I've already visited him. So he is definitely a household name across Australia. And he is from Lebanon originally, a Lebanese-born GP, and he will talk to us from the perspective of primary care, and particularly in terms of his education of medical students and nursing students. Judy Tang, Dr. Judy Tang, we've just met this morning, and with that amazing smile, she and warmth that comes through the screen. She also has a formidable CV. She's a clinical neuropsychologist, and she's a commissioner at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, and she's also been a champion for LGBTIQ+ people, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her perspectives. And Carla didn't really get much of an opportunity to introduce herself, but she's the CEO of Migration Council Australia, and certainly a leader in the multicultural space. And her commitment and passion, I think, over many, many years is highly respected within the community that we work in, but also at all levels in government. And Gulnara, who gave us that wonderful introduction to the partnership, the executive officer for the, to the program, is the executive officer for the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership. So we've got a couple of messages from our political leaders, and the first one is a video message from the Honourable Greg Hunt MP, Minister for Health and Aged Care.
To the launch of the culturally responsive. We'll welcome everybody to the launch of the culturally responsive practice for older people in health and aged care e-learning course. And I particularly want to acknowledge all of the cultures that are represented here today, from our first Australians with their incredible Indigenous culture to our newest Australians, and all of those strands of Australia that come together from the far corners of the world. But we know that the challenge is that sometimes different cultures have different approaches to health. And I was speaking with Dr. Vijay Roach, the new president of the Council of Medical Colleges, and he put it to me very simply. He said, this is about seeing health through the eyes of the patient, through their experience and their culture. And it's a very simple explanation. And whether you're from Indigenous Australia or from Europe or South America, from Asia or Africa, from the Middle East or the Pacific, everybody brings a different experience and a different lens. And so that's why this course is so important. The course is for our health and medical professions and our professionals to understand how best to view healthcare and aged care through the eyes of the person being treated, where they have a background and a different perspective. It's about understanding the nuances. Is it that their history and their culture means that usually there's somebody who stays in the hospital, in an aged care setting for longer? And that can only be a good thing in so many cases. That there are issues around the way in which a woman might see a doctor with somebody else there. There are so many different elements that are covered in this outstanding e-learning course. And so I want to thank everybody that has helped put this together as part of our partnership, in particular our Migrant Health and Ageing Partnership and the Migration Council of Australia that's taken such a lead in this work. You've played a great role in taking care of Australians during the pandemic, and you've played a fundamental role in helping to achieve world-leading vaccination rates. Without being able to speak to all Australians everywhere, we wouldn't have been able to have done this. And to everybody involved in the partnership, to everybody involved in the rollout, to everybody involved in taking care of Australians with COVID during the last 20 months, I want to say thank you. And I am delighted to officially launch the culturally responsive practice for older people in health and aged care e-learning course. And those are the parliamentary bells, and the bells do toll for me, but it's a privilege to be able to speak with you. and a privilege to be able to launch this e-learning course, which will hopefully make a real and meaningful difference to older Australians and the way in which they receive their healthcare and their aged care.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I love that. I love that it's real, you know, that he's just, and that it's part of what we're doing rather than some kind of formalized, slick approach, because I think that's actually what healthcare is as well, is it's real, it's what we do, it's how we engage with people. And yes, we're going to talk about a course that formalizes that in some way, but maybe a really important message is that it becomes part of the way that we live life rather than it just being something that's structured. And going back to what Carla reminded me of is that importance of moving from transactional to relational, because relational has bells ringing and children interrupting and just being yourself. We also have a message from Minister Hawke, and Veronica is going to read that for us.
Thanks, Vijay. As you said, this is a message from Alex Hawke, who's the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. I extend my congratulations to the Migration Council Australia and the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership on the launch of your e-learning course on culturally responsive practice when working with older people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds in health and aged care settings. Dignity in age is of vital importance, particularly in the support provided by health practitioners and aged care workers. While migrants and refugees form an integral part of Australia's cultural fabric, we recognise that they can experience challenges in gaining access to health services. The government understands the value in developing partnerships across mainstream services and the migrant sector, as it enables idea sharing and encourages innovation to deliver quality services based on need, insights, and client experiences. The work of the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership is a great example of this and has been critical in improving the health and well-being of migrant and refugee communities through the sharing of cross-sector knowledge and expertise. This online resource will improve relationships by building an appreciation of cultural diversity and an understanding of how it intersects with health to provide a positively enriching experience for elderly migrants and refugees and service providers. This is a very positive step in bridging the divide across cultures, allowing healthcare practitioners to gain clearer insights on how to work, communicate, and engage sensitively and appropriately within cultures and ethnic communities to deliver suitable primary care, residential care, and end-of-life settings for Australia's ageing migrant and refugee population. I thank the Council and Partnership for the significant amount of work that has been invested in developing this resource, and I look forward to witnessing how this measure will encourage innovation and forward-thinking ideas to support the needs of our migrant and refugee community. Thanks, Vijay.
Thanks a lot, Veronica. That's fantastic. So we're about to have a panel discussion, but if you'll indulge me, I wanted to make some personal reflections first, or share some personal reflections. And the first shout out, when I became president of the college, I think that I was the first president of the college who had to have his mum and dad there when he accepted the gown. And I'm really honoured that as my first position as chair, mum and dad are on the line. And of course, none of us will be here without our mother and father. And when my parents arrived in Australia in 1965, they came to Adelaide, and they were the 25th and 26th Indians to arrive in Adelaide. Well, as it turns out, I was made in India and then born in Australia. And so I became the 27th Indian to arrive in Adelaide. What I recognise, and I can reflect on this for myself, is that as I become older, and I observe this in my parents who are in their 80s, one of my uncles turns 80 today, and I have many aunts and uncles who have migrated to Australia from India, is that you become more conscious of your connection as you get older. Those past connections of culture and customs and traditions, you have a greater realization of that, the influence of the childhood, of your own parents, of your grandparents and beyond. And in Australia, the dominant culture tends to view the world, as the minister said, through the lens of the dominant culture. And that's normal. And I think it's probably the same in every country. But how I wanted to frame this discussion is that I think that with multiculturalism, if we don't engage with that, then I think that we miss an opportunity. We miss an opportunity to engage with so much more, to learn, to expand our experiences. I want to travel the world in my own country. I want to taste every food. I want to listen to every story. I want to experience life in every culture. I don't want to miss out. And so I think that the great opportunity in a country like Australia is duality. That's what multiculturalism really is about, is that we can be Australian and we can value and respect and enjoy everything that there is about this country, but we can also hold with great value and respect and enjoyment every culture that migrants and refugees bring here. So while today is clearly about launching a new and excellent resource, and one that's going to enable us to care for and look after people from all cultural backgrounds as they get older, let's approach this as an opportunity to enrich our lives and our society. We acknowledge elders, past, present, and emerging, the oldest Australians, the original Australians. We have an opportunity in this course to learn from our elders. And in learning to care for them, in learning to be kind, in learning to be compassionate, in learning to venerate older people, then that's something that then is better for us as individuals, for us as healthcare workers, for us as people. It's better for the society as a whole. It's better for our whole nation. And we would all be so much better off. So on that note, I'd like to bring in our panel. And I can now see all of you. And I'd like to start with you, Jamal, and ask you, what does it mean to you? Talk to me. I know we had some scripted questions that we wanted to discuss, but tell me about getting older, about people in your life that are older, about caring as a doctor for people who are older, and their context or the way that you see them given their different backgrounds.
Thanks, Vijay, and thanks for the presentation. To be honest, as a medical practitioner of 30 years experience in Australia, I endeavored throughout my life to look after my whole spectrum of patients and to be sensitive to their need. And even though myself am of Lebanese background and also I am of the Islamic faith, I have felt that I needed something to keep on improving my skill, because I also see Australian of Chinese background, Italian background, Greek background, and Korean background. At the same time, even my own patients who are of the Islamic background or Islamic faith, they come from different culture, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Indonesia, and China itself. So that is my personal involvement in terms of trying to be culturally responsive to the patients that I see on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, I endeavored to impart some of the knowledge that I have to my medical colleagues. And to be honest, I field a lot of calls, or sometimes I give lectures where, and mainly about Australian of the Islamic faith, because that's where I'm more associated, and that's where the wealth of my knowledge. There was in a suburb where a mosque or a group of Muslims resident will be there. I get calls from the local division of general practice, or some GPs get themselves together to give them a talk about exactly what we are talking about today, about launching this e-learning module. And to be honest, when I first heard about it, and I said, it's about time, because there was this gap for this teaching that did not exist anywhere to my knowledge, and it's not at the fingertip at the same time. Doctors, they used to come into my lectures, I used to go to other lectures so we can impart that knowledge. But we used to start from zero. This course will give a very good, solid foundation. That's as a medical practitioner. But at the same time, as an educator, I look after medical students, first year, second year, third year, and at the same time, I supervise and mentor newly graduate doctors who wants to become general practitioners. And to be honest, we see also in my practice many nursing students from different universities that they spend 4 or 5 weeks with us. And this course will be recommended by me to everyone in my practice, to nursing student, medical student, newly graduate doctors preparing for their FRICGB qualification, and to my colleague. I went through the course, Vijay, and I felt that's actually, I have learned from this course. And that is the beauty of it. It is a solid foundation, and it is an encompassing, not addressing the doctor or the nurse, not at all. It's actually addressing the patient and his or her culture, his or her needs, and addressing the way any and every one of us in the health industry will benefit from going through this course. So I recommend it to everyone. And I want to thank actually everyone who was involved in this course. And at the same time, thank you for giving me a chance to express my views about it.
Thanks, Jamal. Judy, that's a good point to bring you in, which is, what does everyone mean to you? How, when we, it's a sort of quite a big remit, really, to try to cover a large group of people or diversity.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we were just talking about it before this all started, you know, that multiculturalism is much more diverse than people realize the concept of multiculturalism is, isn't it? So, you know, as we were just talking about before, there's sometimes we think there's the dominant culture and then everyone else, and then everyone else just fits into this one neat word, multiculturalism. And I think it's easy for us to forget that there's so much diversity, so much difference within multiculturalism itself. And certainly that's what this course hopes to and will and does highlight, that we have to take all these differences and then celebrate them, you know, not necessarily use this as a way to be afraid that whether you've done it properly or anything like that. It's more, this is an opportunity to discover a new person, a new family, work through them in, as we all call it, you know, person-centered care, and providing a service to real people, you know, as opposed to a concept of just a culture or this othering of it all. So that's, I think the most important thing to remember is that we're all different, and the best way around it is to be curious and ask questions, and that's hopefully the exciting and fun part of what we do.
And Jamal, I was thinking, correctly, I think that we have framed all of this discussion in a very positive light, at the opportunities that there are for us. But one of the things that I would reflect on is that, and it's often discussed for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in particular, that because we don't understand their cultural context, then often they receive healthcare that is either inappropriate or we don't recognise, or our cultural biases then influence the healthcare that we deliver. Have you witnessed that, or do you have some thoughts around that, about what the potential disadvantages are if we are not culturally responsive, and how healthcare can be unsuccessful or result in poorer outcomes if we're not culturally responsive?
Look, Vijay, without any doubt, if we look at the parameters for closing the gap, by itself, that gap is closing in health, mainly because many Aboriginal community members are now involved in health and also running the business of health. It's not imposed on them anymore, or at least they are being positioned to take a leadership role. And I have seen it during the COVID pandemic, and the way the health leaders in the Aboriginals community, they are playing a very active role in combating all the misconception and the hesitation. And I reckon they're doing a very good job. Of course, there will be many work for them to do because the gap is quite wide and they need to narrow it by their own work. But at the same time, colleges, doctors who are not Aborigines, they can facilitate that process and then impart their experience. And that's where, on a personal level, I have decided to cease my general practice work in the city and go in my motorhome into remote area and trying to help with the Aboriginals community, not to be leading, but to be following them and assisting them with my vast knowledge in 30 years. So I reckon that from the Aboriginal aspect. At the same time, from well-established community, different communities like the Indians, the Lebanese, and Greek and Italian, they are well equipped from their own offsprings to look after that aspect. The issue comes to the newly arriving and emerging communities, the smaller one. That's where our effort needs to be directed to this community. And most importantly, in my views, that people who are coming from a conflict zone. These are the ones that we need to be acutely aware because their past experiences, it actually taints the way they see authority in general, and medical personnel, could be sometimes, unfortunately, part of that authority that is not there to help them, but rather than the government and the authority or the perpetrators and that sort of things. And that's why we need to work with that issues. And I think we're doing quite well and having the partnership now in place. So what we're doing, or what they've done with this course, as I said, it's a foundation, it's a platform, but they can do a lot more, and we have plenty of time. And I think overall in Australia, we are much better positioned to actually provide people with trauma and people with mental health and people with health a culturally appropriate intervention that suit their need rather than the dominant culture need.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I'm Judy. I'm going to come to you in a second. But this morning I was thinking about today, and I was thinking about how there is a recognition and a veneration of Australian soldiers who have the Anzacs, the people who have served Australia so well over a century and longer, and at least a discussion, definitely a long way to go, but a discussion of the trauma that they've experienced in war and the impacts that has on them and their families. And I thought, as you said, so many migrants and refugees who come to Australia have had traumatic experiences, and yet there isn't really a discussion of their experiences in their context. We tend not to make that part of our conversation.
I was going to say, when I was young, so I was born in Australia as well. My parents are refugees from the Vietnam War, and studying in Australia, when they were talking about World War II, it was a very, it was more European centric, given Australia's involvement in the war. And then they asked us to write essays on our grandparents, like to ask them about how the war was. And I remember thinking to myself, I know nothing about the war according to my grandparents' perspective, because they're from China. And we weren't taught that in our schools. I mean, I suppose these are the things that are missing from an education perspective. But it was a real learning opportunity. You know, I found out my grandfather was a double agent, actually, during World War II, and then I could understand his journey and potentially any of the trauma and experiences from the war, and how that might impact later on in his life when it was towards his end of life care, and what needs might have come up that we probably need to look into, because I know a lot of research has been done into that, around what previously has been considered as behaviors of concern, for example, in a residential aged care setting. But when it's seen through a more accurate multicultural lens, you can actually see that it's those particular behaviors of concern are coming from experiences that have led to them to have these behaviors that helped them survive in that time. So, you know, rather than pathologizing, saying that this is a bad thing, we need to start now thinking about how do we modify our support and our services to ensure, as health professionals, we take into account their experiences in trauma, which can include trauma, and also include the family into their care and their treatment. So yeah. I'm really interested in that kind of stuff.
And Carla, I might bring you in here, which is to say, okay, we can talk about this. There's a course, we're going to educate people, and we're talking about it from a medical, if you like, on the ground experience perspective. But how does government implement these things? How does it work? I mean, for the audience who don't live in the rarefied air of Canberra that you do, you know, how will the good works, if you like, of the Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership, the good works of Judy and Jamal, how will they be translated by government? I mean, we heard from the ministers, we heard of support, but does that translate into real world outcomes?
You like to ask me the tough questions, don't you, Vijay? No, look, I think Jamal made a point and he hit the nail on the head, which is we have the partnership now and there's so much more we could do. And that's absolutely right. This is the tip of the iceberg. So this is one course. It's a fantastic course. It starts to lay the bedrock. But a lot of what we have to do is really integrate this into the broader health system. My grandmother's from Finland turned 100 last year, unfortunately during COVID. So she turned 100 alone in her house, which is probably one of the kind of sadder moments that we as a whole family had, particularly because she's in New South Wales and we're in Canberra. So there wasn't a permission to travel. But she said to me at one stage that she arrived when she was in her 30s and she arrived with 5 children. She said that for most of her life, it was a process of feeling more and more comfortable in Australia. But actually, as she's kind of gotten much older, and in the last sort of 10 years in particular, she says that she feels far more Finnish again. And, you know, it's this process of kind of, you know, and for her now, the really important things is how does she create within her own networks some semblance of a village? Because that for her is really important. And for her, you know, obviously healthcare is a really important part of that, but also the social networks that we build around healthcare and the support systems we build. How do we create some version of a village for her within an Australian setting is really for her about dignity of life in the final years. And so, you know, I think that's really important with respect to aged care, but I think the panel's also opened up some really interesting questions just around trauma and mental health and the impact, for instance, migration has on those aspects, not just from the life left behind, but migration is in itself a huge life event. And it has lasting implications. And I think we tend to see migration as a linear journey, and it's not. It's a complicated journey.
But do you sense? I mean, I'm not asking a political question as such, but do you sense that there is an appetite for that kind of change from our political leaders across the spectrum?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that COVID taught us is the obvious, that we are a multicultural society, you know, and I think Jamal, your work has been absolutely amazing in terms of vaccinations. But more broadly, I think there was this real recognition that we've tended to see the health system through a very sort of homogenous, even the way in which we prepped our pandemic response before the pandemic actually hit, you know, it was very much around an idea of a sort of white Anglo-Saxon society. And I think, you know, we progressively had this realization, particularly within government circles, within department, even more broadly, that anything we do has to have that cultural and linguistic lens over it.
Yeah. So yeah, in fact, Jamal, I might go to you on that. I mean, I've watched the videos, so I know what you're going to say. But will you tell us a little bit about your perspective? I mean, look, COVID is not something that we can avoid in any discussion at this point in time. So I watched one vignette of an African man who died at home, and listening to his cousin speak of having talked to him the night before, him not really realizing how unwell he was. And whether there was a cultural aspect to that or not, I don't know. But one sensed that there was some breakdown in communication between the hospital system and that man at home. And I think he was only 37 years old and had completed a law degree in Australia. And 5 months later, he was dead as a result of COVID. I know that you've done this extraordinary work with vaccination and with trying to get the word out to your community about COVID. Can you reflect on that for us and its importance, and maybe its also relevance to aged care?
Vijay, my response in the pandemic started well before the vaccination rolled out. It was about educating the community. And I know that I held my first webinar. It was in April 2020. Talking about COVID-19 as a virus, mode of transmission and that sort of things. And one of the things, the guy that actually you're mentioning that he passed away, and it's a reflection of many others in different cultural background that they passed away from COVID at home. And I think the last time I counted, we had in the mid-30, probably 34, 35 people died at home. And all of them, apart from one lady, they were all from a culturally and linguistically different background and not an Anglo-Saxon. I'm aware only of one lady. And I'm talking about in Sydney and in Melbourne. People, the way they responded to the pandemic, they responded from their cultural background, their life experience. And unfortunately, all our life, we were in the process of removing obstacle to achieve good health outcome. In pandemic, all the obstacles, they have actually risen rather than demolished. And for anyone from a different background, and especially for traumatized people and people with mental illness or recently arrived people, even that they have got their degrees and been here for years, they still don't know how to navigate the health system or how to navigate these barriers. And a lot of people actually died at home, especially the elderly people, because they refused. I'm not talking about the young generation. They refused to go to hospital. They don't want to be on their own. They don't speak the language at that age of their life, because even though they were fluent in English, as they get older, they would have preferred to communicate in their mother tongue rather than anything else. And they didn't want to eat the food, and they don't want to die on their own. They don't want to eat on their own. So I think what happened during the pandemic, it actually take us to a different dimension of how we need to tackle systemic barriers for people to benefit from our health system. And we'll keep on learning, and we will keep on breaking barriers.
Yeah, and that's Judy's put exactly that, along those lines in the chat, is the importance. We can have courses, we can have discussions, we can do all sorts of things, but it's about a cultural shift. It's about a way, we have to change the way we look at this. And Judy, I'm going to ask you to comment, but I was thinking that, maybe it's my own personal obsession with food, which is why I'm sitting down and you can't see what I really look like. But I think that when you mention food, to me, when I look ahead to that time, is that food is something that is so important. And if one part of being culturally responsive would be giving people the food that they liked, not the food that you decided that was easier to use for them, for comfort, to know that you're in some sort of safe space.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And certainly, from a lot of multicultural events, if you don't have food, people won't show up. That's just how it works. It's the rules. Definitely right. And I know it's been slower, but it has been happening. You've seen a lot of different health settings and residential aged care settings. There's been that accommodation for dietary preferences, not requirements, preferences. Changes in the food. So I think change is coming. But I like I wrote in the chat, the fact of the matter is it's just a little bit slower. That's how it happens with systemic barriers. They're always a little bit harder to change. And I feel like the only way that we could really speed it up is to bring that into education, having courses like these, but also bringing, the word is cultural competency, but cultural considerations, more education about cultural considerations, and not have that condensed to, for example, 1 week, and then people somehow think that they're all of a sudden culturally competent if they've done a 1 week thing. I think a lot of these things really highlight that it's the start of a process. You're starting to learn about cultural considerations, how to be culturally understanding about the people around you, and then the rest of your journey and our journey is to go out there and actually learn more and discover more as we go. So I think that's providing more opportunities such as this one to allow for cultural competency courses and information, which then would encourage further development and learning moving forward.
What if I put that back to you, Judy, in a different way, potentially a little bit controversial, but are we being too polite about all of this? In the sense that what we're talking about, everything that we've talked about now, traumatized people from different backgrounds, people who quite appropriately have expectations. Have we, as the multicultural community, as the non-dominant culture, part of the non-dominant culture, not part of the non-dominant culture, are we being too polite? Are these not reasonable expectations?
No, I think you're right. It is reasonable expectations. One of the things, and that's I feel like it's another bit of a barrier is, socially, a lot of us have been taught to be quieter about these issues, haven't we? So, which means we're all learning how to raise our voices and ask for more. And yeah, I suspect we probably are being too polite. And that really highlights the importance of having allies and supporters from a dominant organization or a dominant culture to really give us a pedestal or a microphone or a seat at the table to bring everyone on more even footing with regards to support and treatment. So yeah, we're being too polite, but because we're wonderful people sometimes, and we forget that we need to speak up for ourselves.
Jamal, do you have any reflections on how does one engage? Is the non-white Anglo-Saxon person, the person who belongs to a multicultural or linguistically diverse, I'm going to have to learn how to say all of these things clearly, aren't I? Diverse background. Have we approached this with, should we be more assertive?
Look, I reckon we're doing very well. If I go back into where we were 30, 20, 10 years, and now we are actually doing extremely well. And I can recall like Ethnic Affairs Commission, Community Relations Commission, Multicultural New South Wales in New South Wales, and the Multicultural Foundation in Victoria and others. To be honest, we are doing much better than what we did 20, 30 years ago. And it's been incremental. And it's actually, we're doing very well. We don't need to shout. We just need to have a dialogue. We don't need to demonstrate. We need to engage. And we don't need to do it as actually loud. We do it quietly. And it has been done. I can see that has been a major cultural shift in Australia as a whole. But let's face it, these things takes time. And the more we will engage and the more we identify and talk about them systematically, it will work. And I reckon we are represented at the decision-making hierarchy, but we can do better, yes. And I think our second generation, much better than me and much better than the previous one. So I think it's incremental, it is continuous, it's a non-stop, because what we are doing, we are shaping the nation. Australia is changing, peoples are changing. We are very proud of whom we are, and we are going to be even prouder whom we are going to be. And that's why we need our people, younger generation, to keep engaging, keep on achieving, keep studying, and we will get there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that it's interesting, if you're living in history, history always moves too slowly. You know, you want to get somewhere, and you just have to accept that these are things. And in fact, of course, that's what people who are older than us teach us, is a concept of patience, and that things will change in time. I think of myself as getting older, but possibly I'm not old enough yet to have become patient, and I'm impatient for change. I thought as we come to the end of this discussion, I thought, Judy, maybe, and you are very young, so maybe this is asking you to look a long, long way into.
I think it's the Asian genes. I just look younger.
Youth rep on the panel.
And maybe you could reflect on this for yourself, or you could reflect on this for the people in your life. But what is it that you seek when it comes to that time in your life? What are the things that it will be important to communicate to your carers and the community around you?
I actually was in a part of a research area in aging. So my neuropsychology background, I'm actually specialized in gerontology, and I was, well, I still am, part of the Australian Association of Gerontology. So aging is actually an interest of mine. And in that time, what I found as a researcher within the aging industry was how convoluted and complex the aging support system is, and how it can be even more confusing for those who come from a multicultural background, especially if English is not their first language. And certainly, I'm sort of looking back for my grandparents and navigating their care and support services. We were really much at the mercy of the health professionals, because even though I was a health professional, I wasn't working in the area where I clearly understood the support pathways for my grandparents. So as someone, who was a family member of an older adult, what I would have loved for them and for us is someone to really help us navigate and really better understand the pathways of support and services that are out there, because there's a lot of stuff out there. Australia does have quite a lot of great services. It's just a shame that not many of us know that they're there, so they're not used at the end of the day. So that's one of the things, and that's something, as if for me, if I were to grow older, I would love to have someone to say, hey, so these are your options that we can, that can support you. How do you feel that would be the best way to approach it? Certainly, you're talking about food, and who doesn't love food? I love food, and it'd be great to have, you know, a lovely variety of food that reflects the multiculturalism and diversity of the nations. You know, and I think I really hope that it'll come a long way. Surely by the time I get that old, I'll be able to have dumplings or something instead of.
Absolutely. We can all meet in person.
Yeah.
When we can meet in person, then we would have all been gathering around a table having this conversation, and there would have been that wonderful variety.
I'm very keen to see how person-centered care evolves and develops in time. I feel with more education and more courses like these, and more discussion about how we can be more considerate and develop person-centered care, I mean, I'm feeling optimistic about it, and I do hope, you know, future health professionals sort of take that lens and approach and bring it into my care when I get to that age.
Yeah. Thank you, Judy. So sadly, I mean, it's amazing how quickly an hour can pass. And so I'd just like to make a couple of closing comments. I think that I picked out, as I was preparing for today, important words. And I think that one word is safety. And safety, we tend to, in a medical context, talk about physical safety, whether somebody's bleeding, whether they're having a heart attack, how to treat them. But safety means cultural safety, for a human to feel safe in the context that they live in. Another word that was very clear to me is flexibility, and that's what the healthcare system needs. It needs to be flexible, it needs to be responsive, it needs to realise that it isn't just that one size fits all. And I think the theme that came through in all of that discussion was the understanding that we need to understand an individual in the context of their personality, their past experiences, their cultural background, their relationships, their physical and their emotional health, their community. Where did they come from? Because a human is so much more. A human is the sum of all of those parts. And for each human, it's all very different. So it's been a great honour to be with you. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Gulnara, to the whole team who put this together, to Jamal and Judy for your extraordinary contribution, for the work that you do and continue to do, for the care that you give the Australian community, and to everybody who joined us today. You know, we are multicultural Australia. Each one of us contributes to an extraordinary country, and we're privileged to be here. And I'd like to end by acknowledging the two older people in my life, my mum and dad, who hopefully were able to navigate the technology and listen this afternoon, because they came to Australia many, many years ago. They came and went to a small town in Adelaide, and they had to forge a new life. They had to adjust to a new experience. And they've done so in an extraordinary way. And they, each themselves, have been extraordinary leaders in Australia and added to this community. And as they get older, I hope that they can feel safe in Australia, that they can feel safe in the care that they receive, and that next part of their journey in life is a happy, safe and positive one. And to all the others who are older, that we realised how we are here because of you, and we say that with gratitude, and we hope to care for you in the way that you deserve. So on that note, we'll close this webinar, and we look forward to engaging with you in other spheres in the future. Thank you.